Hello. Thank you for. Thank you for staying behind. That's very school. Thank you for coming back and to join us for this brief sort of panel discussion and Q&A. I'm Rhys Morgan. I'm going to chair this discussion on behalf of Queer District Collective, who offered to kind of set up a Q&A at the end of the performance. Obviously we've got Tom with us, and as well as Angela Piccini, and also the Deputy Lord Mayor, Chris Panellists as well. So I'm going to start with a few questions that I've prepared, which is going to be hopefully quite discursive, and then we'll open it up to the floor for any questions that you have. So, these are quite directed at Tom, but hopefully we can branch out.
I think everyone's probably had an opinion.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Angela is also in the show as the voice.
And this was the first time I knew of it, so it was a bit of a surprise.
And it's what you teased out the story of Ken Williams and Maggie Smith's long friendship, and he was known for having close relationships with his co-carry-on stars, Barbara Windsor and especially Hattie Jakes, who were a very, very close bond. And I was wondering, you know, that you talk in a Shining interview, you talk of Smith and his being twin souls with Williams. And I wonder what drew you to this closeness between Williams and Smith, and what of this particular relationship resonated for you, and yours and Claire's relationship.
So it was that sort of curiosity around their mirroring each other's behaviour. And, you know, this comment that I sort of say, I mean, it's a very flippant comment, but that in Downton Abbey she's just performing as Kenneth Williams in drag. And I just think that's hysterical, but also quite profound, how you could, refer back to your back catalogue of people that you've known to perform a version of someone. And from what I've read about their friendship as well, it was kind of over this particular kind of time that sort of centred around the two theatres, the Globe Theatre and the Queen's Theatre, that were kind of next door, and they had this kind of, you know, either they were both performing in one of them, or one was in the one next door, and there was this kind of crossover. And when Kenneth's lack of interest for the theatre kind of faded, and also that friendship kind of faded as well. So it was quite, it had its moment, really, I think. And I was interested in that, but how significant it was that they were these twin souls.
I guess, Angela, obviously you knew Claire as well, and I wonder for you, how seeing that, what did that mean? Like, how did you reflect on presentation of that friendship between Maggie Smith and that reflection? How did that resonate with you?
So it was interesting, because obviously I said it was a surprise, but obviously I know that we had that conversation and you were recording it, and that sense in which you were sort of trying to work with different bodies as kinds of archives of memory, and people who knew Claire, and obviously we're in a room full of people who knew Claire much better than I did, but I knew Claire and you through particular points of time. And I think what was so interesting, seeing her being conjured, I want to use the word conjured on the stage, with the ribbon and with the lettuce, which I loved that performance, and I have such fond memories of being at that performance and going up and eating the lettuce and feeling brave. And that when you were talking about Maggie Smith being Kenneth Williams in some way, what carries through my life is that sense of what would Claire do in this situation, and wanting to be always a little bit more like Claire. So I think what you did in this space was create, I don't know how other people in the room feel, but it felt like it was a space in which to celebrate her life, and particularly in the context of Dane's recent death. It's incredibly profound and overwhelming and strange and very, very beautiful. And it's not just through words; it's through those gestures. You know, you're in the onesie. You're in kind of in the silver onesie. So there's all these lovely little reference points that some of them are very. Some of them are obvious, not in a bad. I mean, it's sort of obvious in terms of explicit, and some of them are more implicit. And so it's got that really lovely sense of being in a kind of strange seance kind of space, which feels appropriate, and I wish we could do that for many people who we've lost over time, and to just do it with that attention both to detail that she would have loved and with some of the sort of flippancy that she might not have loved so much.
Yeah, I had a friend that came to see it that knew Claire really well, and he was like, just the ribbon is just so not Claire, like the way I do with the ribbon. It's like, Claire's like, it needs to be, she'd go, I want it to be, and it's like, I can't, you know, I've got different plans for that ribbon, how I would do that ribbon with possibly funding from the Arts Council. But yeah, and he was like, yeah, that's not her, but yeah, she probably wouldn't like that bit.
Yeah, when it bundles out of the bag. But that's perfect.
Yeah.
I was reflecting on how the close relationships of gay men and women is kind of, you know, there's a motif there that has a long history, and more recently it's been something that's been maybe trivialised, but it's endured. And around the time when Kenneth Williams and Maggie Smith were performing at adjacent theatres, is around the time that Sheena Delely's Taste of Honey was produced, and that was obviously very groundbreaking in presenting kind of a new approach to, I guess, queer family. And I was wondering, in terms of across those decades, those 6 decades, what you think has changed, and how that felt to you for your relationship with Claire in terms of that particular type of intimacy, and also in more broad terms, what that looks like as a queer person now in comparison, because obviously it was written by its nature, is written at a time of isolation by lockdown, so there's quite a weight there. I wonder what your reflections are on that.
Well, yeah, it was written during lockdown, and so I had this like unpressured time on it, and I think that's why there's lots of layers to it, and there's lots of thinking behind it, and there's lots of, you know, what was great for me about lockdown was because I live in my imagination, and I can be completely sustained by that. When I'm making shows, I feel haunted by the people that I'm telling the stories about. I mean, I didn't have visitations from Kenneth and Maggie, but I almost did, if you know what I mean. So yeah, in terms of Taste of Honey, I mean, I've always felt very aware of those relationships that are very platonic, and wanted to explore them, and I don't think that we talk about that kind of love enough as humans, and so yeah, this is something that I was thinking about.
I was wondering, Chris, because obviously as a queer person, like how do you feel about that in terms of how it's represented, but also
I think the whole thing of relationships, I think, is really interesting, because as a single queer person, there's a whole thing about who your other person people are, and a few months ago that became very visible for me, being asked to consider being the Deputy Lord Mayor of the city, but I had to think about who my consort would be. Now, in the past, there would have been in other places, there would have been lots of close friends. It would be very easy, it would have been a woman, and it would have looked fairly heteronormative. My sisters don't live close by. I have a niece who lives nearby who works ridiculous hours, 6 days a week, and would never really been able to fit life around. I could have gone for a counsellor and made it a very worky type thing, but my best friends are there, and so I have a friend who is my consort, a male friend, a gay male friend who is my consort, and that begins to change some things. We've had interesting things within the council. How do they deal with these things? They didn't have enough male consort badges to go out because they needed 2 this year. They're not used to having 3 men on the team because they've never had it before. So there were some really practicalities. There'd been, how do we describe things? In theory, my consort, because they're not my partner, should be called my escort. And I said, oh, I'm not sure that I want to go around doing an escort who's sort of quite a few years younger than me. I think that might send out quite the wrong message. I think the world is getting used to things being different, but our relationships really matter. And I think for queer people, our relationships that aren't necessarily about our partner in life are really, really important. And so tonight, looking in on a performance where you saw relationships portrayed with 3 of the 4 protagonists on stage was really powerful, because that really, really matters. And as you said, we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about those relationships we have with people that are platonic but deep and meaningful. And I think as a world we need to do that, and quite often it is through entertainment that begins to come out and begins to be reflected. So I was really moved by that sort of element of the play and how it sort of reads across into so many other elements of so many other people's lives.
Andrew, do you have anything from a non-gay male perspective? It would be quite interesting to hear your take on that.
I mean, I think it's just really, really interesting what you say, because there's a kind of political, radical potential for that, thinking about the different sorts of flavours and layers through our relationships with people, and also the way, you can move from being lovers to friends and friends to lovers and all of those things. I think it's really quite powerful. I mean, it's strange for me to sort of, because obviously when we were all friends, I was sort of living in a very straight relationship, and yet I'm sort of identifying as a queer person. So I guess it's also that thing around multiplicity and hybridity, and that's also something that we bring out much more now, and that is really important to begin to talk about.
Yeah, and like what you were saying, is, it has so much potential to really like shake everything up, shake the whole system up, just by how we talk about the relationships that we form, I think.
And how performance, like other forms of art making, allows us to sort of model new ways of interrelating. And although it's sort of, for people who aren't involved in it, it's sort of seen as, I don't know, the frills on the edges of things. It's actually, this is where the work of reframing and reconfiguring politics and democracies and interrelationships and power dynamics, this is where it's happening.
As artists and performers, you and Claire shared a bond in your vocation, which was the same for Maggie Smith and Kenneth Williams. You remark on how Williams, in his darker moods, would describe the theatre as becoming a toy theatre to him. And you wondered if, in these darker moods, whether Maggie Smith would get frustrated with him. Do you think as performers, bonds like this are formed as a way of making sense of what it is to be a performer and to kind of create a sense of security for yourselves?
I don't quite understand the question. Can you say it in a different way?
So I guess I'm asking, that bond that you share and you try and understand from what other performers have said about each other. That bond that you share, do you think a part of that is made to in your goal of making sense of what performance is and why you do it and why you, and there's a mutual kind of there's a discursive thing there, I would guess. And what does that look like in terms of like yours and Claire's relationship? Was it like, what were those moments like when you were trying to unravel what being a performer is? And make sense of that?
I feel like it wasn't like that. I mean, I feel like we were obsessed with work, talking about work, the two of us together, and it was always quite difficult to get us off that topic. But then there was a lot of joy and play within that work. And actually the Lettuce performance was a low point for our relationship because we were coming at it from a quite different place. But yeah, but we managed to, I basically stepped back from that and was like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. But I don't want to get involved in this nitty-gritty conversations because everyone was kind of like, yeah, being too about it. And so I just ended up almost being, you know, like an actor being told what to do, really, which was fine. You know, I wasn't funny about that, but we approach things in different ways, you know. I'm staying at the Jury's Hotel, and me and Claire were in this thing called, you know, the Hams of the Day. Do you remember that being here? We both stayed in the Jury's Hotel, and it just is so familiar to be in that hotel and think about those times. Don't know why I mentioned that, but...
I was just about to say, it's probably good time in terms of timing, and there she is, Sove, straight away, straight in there.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, let's open it up to the floor, and we've already got our first question, so Sove, go ahead.
Well, firstly, I just want to say that was so wonderful and evocative, and I cried. I think lots of people cried because of the memories it brought back. But also because it was a beautiful illustration of the process of how one lives with someone who is gone and you continue to have those conversations.
Yeah.
I continually hear Claire's voice at different moments and have those conversations about work. And I, with that, remember the tensions and the awkwardnesses where we fell out or disagreed about something, and how does one live with that, continue to live with it when you're the living one. And I think you illustrated that beautifully and really tangibly, so I thank you for that. But then I wanted to ask you where you go from here in a way, which is almost like a completely unanswerable question, but as acknowledging this, the influence of someone, of such a close collaborator and friend, where does that carry on with future works? Do you feel that that thread will always be there, or yeah, like?
I think it will, because I mean, like, you know, this is just generally talking about the way that I make work. It's like, I was like, I really want to engage with loads of different people as participants within the work. But I'm not sure whether I can actually direct people on stage and and I don't know if I want to share the stage. And she was like, well, you just have conversations with them and then you perform their stories. And like, ever since she said that, that's all I've been doing, really. I haven't done anything else. And I think I'll just carry on making, because people know that's the kind of, I mean, in a way, this is slightly different to the work that I normally make, because I've had loads of time to sit with it, you know, the lockdown and everything. But usually I have this sort of like strategy, like I go into a community, I collect the stories, I, you know, weave them into a narrative, and I present it, and it's like, bish, bash, bosh. And that's, not that Claire told me, you know, that formula, but it comes from that original idea of just like being, of having the conversations and then performing those stories, I think.
Yeah.
Can I have something? I didn't know Claire. It felt to me like I did by the end of it, and it felt like a very generous way of sharing her. It wasn't like a kind of keeping her to yourself. It felt like a love letter, the whole thing. I thought it was really lovely, and I'm desperate to look at the QR code because I want to see what she looks like.
Well, you can't really see because of the costume, but yeah, I mean, you obviously you can find images of her online.
Can I ask you a technical thing about when it came to you in your creation of the piece, how this device with the cloth at the back and the projection and stuff, where did that come to you in the process?
The cloth is, I like calling it a cloth actually.
It is a cloth.
I just used it. I used it in another show as well because it holds projections really well. But also, when you light it, sometimes it doesn't look like it's there, so the figures look quite ghostly. So my last show was like that with. So yeah, I just used it again.
When you're putting a show together, do you film it, or do you have someone you trust to? Because obviously you're all over the place.
This is harder to do because you can't really.
Yeah. So how do you feel it out from your perspective on the stage, or do you have someone?
Yeah, you sort of sense it, but I really never really felt it until I did it properly. But because I was looking at it as a script, really, mostly, I was looking at that. And the bits in between the projections were more sparse when I originally developed it. And then people were like, oh, more of personal stories and more of you. And so it became a bit more of that. But because, in the in-between bits when they're not talking, that's just they're on a loop. So they just do, nothing really. So you kind of can make as much text or material as you want for that moment. I was sort of wanting to ask you that question about, you felt like you knew Claire at the end, but whether you want to see an image of her, or because I feel like I didn't want to show or be like Claire is the objects, but she's not. You don't ever see a representation of her, and whether that felt.
I don't know if you need to see it as part of it, but I'm curious now, just in the way you are when you hear a lot about a certain person. And for me, she was the central, actually, strangely, the central character holding it all together. So I'm just curious to see. I don't know if you need her in it.
I imagine she could become representative of many people or relationships.
Yeah, this is this very special date because I'm in Plymouth where she lived, but also it's the end of the tour, so I've done 6 dates, and people. Well, I mean, people wouldn't know her in Norwich or Colchester or all these places, but they have versions of this story. I think that's the intention, really.
I think given her engagement with the impossibility of the archive and the disappearance of the body and all of those complexities there, it feels right for us not to see her, because that feels much closer to her practice and her interests.
It's just more a comment kind of about Claire and the part where you played airplane and put the ladder. That was just incredible, and the sense of the body, the weighted body there and not there was, and that's when I was starting crying, but I just thought that part was incredible and kind of really held her here and not here at the same time. Just wanted to tell you.
Thank you.
I've got a question, but I don't know what it is, which is my usual problematic formula. But it was about the sort of Englishness of it. Like, I feel like you bring into the room these elements of Englishness that are so queer, and yet we all, those of us that are English, you know, and your fish fingers for tea in the back room, and Kenneth Williams being there, and Will-o'-the-Wisp, and if you were a queer kid, like, you always knew that was queer, and I can never quite believe that my grandma didn't. But I really kind of sort of appreciated it being reclaimed in this time of that sort of Middle England. I don't mean it in the derogatory sense, but the sort of, you know, that layer of whatever class we want to see it in as being poisoned or turned against us. So I just appreciated it coming back to the queer and the absolute outsideness of all of those really representatively English people like Maggie Smith and Kenneth Williams. And I wondered if that's something you ever think about.
I think about whether you could talk about Maggie Smith as queer quite a lot, because I think that part of me thinks that she is, but she's so like an institution as well. Like maybe she was more then than she is now. I don't know. I was also going to just say that I've been obsessed with Kenneth Williams and performing as him in different guises for quite a long time. And I introduced the film Prick Up Your Ears, the Joe Orton film about Joe Orton, as Kenneth Williams, just like transcribed an interview that he did about Joe Orton. And then I ended up putting together a cabaret night or cabaret day for children, and it was called like Queer Kids, and it was like performing different things that was all TV stuff, which was Will-o'-the-Wisp, Rent a Ghost. I mean, these are things that only people of a certain age will and Pigeon Street as well. Is it Long Distance Clara and Pigeon Street? Don't know. You don't know. Anyway.
We've got loads more time, but
is there anyone on the?
Yeah.
Are they asking questions? Is there anyone watching?
Tom, may I ask you another question? Oh, is there someone?
There's Rachel behind you.
It's only me. So I was really excited in the performance, Tom, to hear you say about the Performance Reenactment Society, because when I was thinking about what this performance might be like, I was thinking about that sense of like, oh, will Tom perform these different characters? Will I see this person lip sync? Will I see this person, you know, take the facial mannerisms of someone else? And when you mentioned that, it brought me right back to doing that. So at the Pigs of Today, Hannah and I, who also collaborate together, like performed a shot. I guess they were like stills, weren't they? They weren't like performing a scene, it was performing a still image from a performance by two male platonic friend collaborators as two female platonic friend collaborators. You know, in a very like cardboard and string way, we kind of made our set, I think.
But really beautiful images, weren't they?
Yeah, they were so gorgeous, and it still hangs in my living room. And when I see that, I really think about seeing the performance that we're performing. So there's something about having done it with my own body that, like you were expressing here, you know, it just allows you to experience that in a different way. And I'm curious about what the relationship is with that feeling to, you know, maybe tropes from queer culture like lip syncing or drag performances that are about the embodying of another, and how that maybe feeds in to what you've made tonight.
I mean, I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but when I'm performing as Maggie, I wanted it to not to feel particularly draggy. I wanted it to feel like it was me conjuring up Maggie, but I didn't want it to feel like a drag version of Maggie Smith, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
And so
it does. It feels as you intended it for me.
it what?
It feels as you described that.
Yeah.
For me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like I mean, all of my shows have those moments in. I don't know if I'm answering that question.
It always feels more like that's, you know, the famous scene in Mulholland Drive. I mean, that feels more like it's playing with that space between the body and space and recording technology and memory and, you know, being the oracle, but also it failing obvious, because it always fails, and that's the interesting bit too, right?
Yeah.
Because that's why you do lip syncing, is the potential for failure.
Yeah. And well, me and Jen, the technician, are you here, Jen? I can't see you. We just had a really quick conversation in the dressing room about the moment where, like, Kenneth doesn't say the thing, and we were both like, yeah, but we really like that bit.
I think probably. So you absolutely, you are gone.
Well, actually, I was kind of riffing off, was it the question you asked or someone just behind about how you organise and performed the set and the performance yourself before you made it a show. And like, I make sculpture. I often make sculpture that's like event-based, and I wondered if you could say any more just about that physical relationship with creating the show. Like, how does it feel in your body when you're sort of projecting yourself there? And
oh, that's such a good question, but it's like quiet. But I was just thinking, I was thinking that there was a moment where in the pandemic we were like, yeah, you can present something, everyone has to be really socially distant, and I was asked to present this, or a version of this, as a work in progress. I didn't have any projections. So I just was like saying this bit, la la la, and then I'd be like, Maggie over here, and then I was just like, and that was really fun to do. And I keep thinking about that as a way of changing it up with this show. And I was also thinking about like whether I keep the projections but don't have the audio on them, and I just do all the voices live, because it came from some of the audio is not that well recorded. We didn't have very much money, we did, and then one of the lines is particularly bad, and tonight we were like, what if you just cut the sound and I do Maggie's voice for that bit? And I was like, maybe that could be all a bit like that, because it would make it an interesting different version of it. Don't know.
I love its material, that again, that tangibility, that material that you can keep working with, and really exciting.
Yeah, so this tour was, we were going to ask funding for the arts. Well, we applied for funding, we didn't get it, and so it's all sort of like having to make do with what we've got, and that's fine. I'm used to that. But there's also lots of other possibilities that we could have experimented with, but we kept it on the down low.
I think there's probably a good place to wrap up, but if there's any more questions, I'm sure Tom will field them in the bar afterwards. I want to say thank you again to Chris and Angela, and of course Tom, and thank you everybody for coming. Thanks for